place a bid, make your offer. Boom, you've won the auction or you've made an offer and the seller's accepted. I'm gonna flip it back to you now. So as a buyer, how does all this work? How do I transfer payment and make sure that I'm protected as a buyer?
Yeah, this is a really important piece, and it actually gives us an opportunity to articulate what Flippa is, because we should make it clear that Flippa is not a broker. Flippa is a marketplace. It's an end-to-end peer-to-peer environment where you can look for listings, decide what you want, negotiate, and finally, safely transact. And the safely transact piece is something really important, and it's something very close to our hearts and something we're working very hard on. And so let's talk about that. So I've placed an offer or I've made a successful bid. I now find myself in the sales completion area. And this is what that looks like. You can see that on your screens. Now there's a couple of things to point out here. On the right-hand side, bottom right-hand side, we've got some documents that you can leverage. Now remember that Flippa is free for buyers. Flippa is free for buyers. So there is absolutely no risk with putting an offer on the Flippa platform and then finding your way into this safe, secure environment where we can also assist you through the process. And so there's a couple of things. One, there's a letter of offer template. Download that, fill in the details. Now you don't have to use that if it's a simple, inexpensive asset exchange. But as the deal complexity increases, you might want to have a letter of offer template. And so what that does is it enables you to put in the terms of the offer. And you can then attach that. It says attach file from my computer, download it, fill it in, attach the file, and away you go. Similarly, there's a sales agreement. So that's a contract of sale. And you can use that contract of sale to bind the two parties, yourself and the seller, to the terms of the agreement. In particular, what are the assets that you are acquiring? Source code,
list them out.
domains,
Right.
contract agreements, contracts, supplier agreements. Maybe there's employee agreements. Maybe there's one specific supplier from Alibaba powering an FBA store.
Yeah.
And you want to know who that one specific supplier is.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some confidentiality risk in that. So this is an important piece to govern that relationship.
Yeah.
And we've helped thousands upon thousands of people work through this process. And so we've got a very, very strong handle on it.
Excellent.
Now, the second piece is, of course, communication with the seller. It doesn't stop at the point at which you've got a successful bid or offer. You need to start to get into the detail here. And this is where you'll find that you're starting to go through the payment process. So talk about when you will be able to pay. Talk about what the exchange of assets timing will look like. And then finally, safely and securely, pay through escrow.com. Now, of course, we do enable PayPal for lower value transactions as well. And we do also have a sophisticated wallet service for higher value transactions. In this particular case, safe and secure payment through escrow.com. And so what that will enable you to do is set up an account on escrow.com if you don't already have one. If you do, of course, you can connect that. And then finally, you'll receive status updates on the on the status
transaction, yeah.
on the status of the transaction right here within the Flippa sales completion area. And so it's a really important environment for people to be aware of.
Excellent. Well, this is great. I think that the one theme that's really run through this whole webinar, I would say, is just communication. From looking at the listing and starting to ask due diligence questions to the actual negotiation piece up through the sale completion area. You want to stay in great communication with the seller, and you want to make sure that seller is staying in great communication with you to ensure a great transaction for all parties involved.
Okay, now we've been through a lot. We've got some time for Q&A.
We do. There's some great questions. Do we have time for a few?
Yeah, I think we've got time for a few. It's been 45 minutes or so, so let's have a look.
Excellent. So there's a great question from the field. If I am not a very tech-savvy user, what key metrics should I be looking for in Google Analytics? I think this is a great question. I can answer it if you'd like to.
Yeah, I think you've got a little bit more detail here. My first response would be to say organic traffic.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Organic traffic.
Yep. Yeah, organic traffic is like gold. It's free traffic coming from the search engines. You can't fake it. You can't cheat your way into it. Organic traffic is really like gold when it comes to content sites. Yeah. Direct traffic is very valuable as well. Let's not discount that.
It means you built a brand, right?
It means you built a brand. Usually implies loyalty as well. Social and referral traffic is it just depends. Sometimes it's paid for, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's coming in free as well, and it just falls under social. But organic is gold. That's the one you're really going to want to look for. A great organic traffic, a great site has organic traffic above, I'd say, probably about 30–40% coming in from organic. That's what you want to see.
And for a lot of the higher value assets, you'll find that someone who's got a very high proportion of paid traffic has done a very good job to get a significant return on ad spend. And so you just want to ask them about that. Now, one of the things we should point out actually is that most of the time, sellers will agree to a transitional handover period.
Yeah.
And so you can learn a lot through that. So if you're not particularly sophisticated, but you're really excited about getting into the space, in the sales completion area, or perhaps a little bit earlier on than that, set the expectations up for the seller, but ask for a 7, 14, 21, 30-day handover period. And learn the ropes with the assets at your disposal, with the money in the hands of the seller. Learn the ropes, understand the business, and operate from there.
And most sellers are happy to have, to hand off their baby to someone who's just as passionate as they are, and they want to see this work, right? So most sellers that I find are absolutely happy to have a few week handoff period for exactly that.
Fantastic.
A great question here on the difference between annual revenue and annual profit and what you're paying in terms of your multiples. So the question is, am I expected for a SaaS business, let's say, to pay 2.7 times the annual revenue, or is that 2.7 times the annual profit?
So it could be either.
Absolutely.
So a seller can choose to price their business in a way that they decide is appropriate. But of course, you've got every opportunity as the buyer to drive that discussion in any way you think is appropriate. From my perspective, you would be paying and analyzing the business on an annual net profit basis. Now, the reason being is revenue can be inflated through paid marketing.
Right.
So if you've got a very, very strong ROAS, return on ad spend, then that's probably okay. But you want to understand that. I personally would be assessing businesses on an annual net profit multiple basis. Now, the other way that can be articulated on the Flippa platform, or other places for that matter, is on an SDE basis, seller discretionary earnings. So of course, net profit is revenue minus OPEX minus COGS. In the event that there's some CapEx, minus CapEx too, and you arrive at your net profit number. Now, SDE is that net profit number adjusted for non-carry forward costs. Costs that as a new owner of the asset, you don't have liability for.
What would be an example of that?
A bank loan, an owner's salary. Let's say that someone is paying themselves $20,000 a year. Well, they will typically add that back because that's not a carry forward cost. You can decide what you want to pay yourself out of business, but it's not a cost that you are acquiring. So that's where SDE comes into play.
Excellent. So we have a great question here on fraud, and we've talked a little bit about how to protect yourself from fraud. And I'll start by saying, we've done a lot of work on fraud to make sure that it's just gone from the system. That said, you still want to be careful. And this person's asking, how do you catch small instances of fraud in the numbers and in Google Analytics and in the revenue numbers that you see? How do you know what to spot or what to look for in order to kind of stop fraud? And how would you answer that?
In GA specifically?
Let's start with GA.
So the first thing I would do is look for atypical spikes.
Exactly.
So I would look for
anomalies,
days, months, weeks, months, I should say, where there is a significant spike. Now, of course, sellers know that the best time to sell a business is when it's flat or growing. And the worst time to sell a business is when it's declining. So they could inflate their traffic numbers through quick fire marketing spend. Now, the question is the definition of fraud. Because if I just choose to spend money to get traffic and I disclose that, then clearly that's transparency and there's no fraud involved. If I am using some kind of aggregate network to acquire traffic and I wouldn't have access to that as a new buyer, then you need to question how that traffic is being derived at.
Absolutely. I think in a future Advanced Buyers webinar, we can really get into Google Analytics in a big way and show you exactly, get into things like traffic sources, how to look through that, how to look through backlink profiles and sketchy backlinks. But we'll save that for another webinar.
So we will do that webinar. And the other thing we should add is we we won't announce who with just yet, but there's a pretty exciting partnership coming our way in a few months, where we provide very, very significant verification at the source for your traffic profile.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to talking about that when we can. This is a great question from Mr. Ryan Clark. How many websites does a typical buyer own?
Yeah, so we ran a survey, and so I'll actually misstate the number, but it was something like the average buyer within the Flippa ecosystem owns 3 or more websites. Yeah, it's actually a lot.
Yeah, it is.
But the funny thing was, there's some huge anomalies. I mean, there's some people who are prolific buyers and sellers on the platform who own 50 to 70 assets at any given time.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a great interview on the Flippa blog right now with a buyer based in Croatia called Goran Duskic. And Goran and I sat on the phone for about 45 minutes. You can watch the interview. There's also a transcript there. And Goran currently owns 50 assets.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's really fascinating to see this asset class grow with these power buyers.
But remember, they're small. They're small. And Stacey now owns 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And they're all small. So you don't have to be a millionaire to get into the space.
No, not at all.
In Goran's case, I think the vast majority of his assets are generating a couple of thousand dollars.
Excellent. Beautiful cash flow. So question from Marin Galloway here. So after we've paid money into escrow, what if the seller just doesn't sign the agreements and wants to back out and refuses to provide deep due diligence? Can you get your money back as a buyer?
Yes. So the great thing is your money is sitting in a wallet. That wallet cannot be touched. If the seller, and remember that you need to authorize the release of that money. So it's not like suddenly there's this ghost from the past who comes in and grabs X amount of dollars and releases it to the seller. That can only be released under your authority. And so the important thing to note is that it is a wallet. The funds are protected by escrow.com, and you can simply dispute the transaction and receive your monies back.
It really is such a simple process. I mean, escrow is fundamentally a service for buyers, so you have nothing to worry about. That's why we love it.
Now, but of course, once the assets are released and they are in your hands per the agreement, and the agreement can either be the listing detail, so that's the list of the assets which are included in the sale, or the sales agreement that you've taken out of the Flippa environment. If they've transferred those assets, well, of course, the expectation is that you release the money.
Yeah, absolutely. Question from Brendan Rockel. You'll like this one. Do you recommend any other resources before getting started? What other resources are out there for buyers? I'm really interested in getting started, but I still feel nervous due to my inexperience.
Yeah, I had an interesting chat with a gentleman called John Chen. He's based in New York City. He's sold a business on the Flippa platform for $550,000 a couple of months ago. And it was an asset he had acquired on the platform for $7,500 2.5 years ago. Now, the important thing is that John is now registered as a buyer on the Flippa platform again, and he's browsing. And so the first thing I would say is browse a lot. In John's case, he looked at 50 different websites before he bought his next. And so don't rush into an acquisition of an asset.
No.
Look at lots of things. It can feel painful, but Flippa's search and Flippa's safe search experience is there for you to enable the browse. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is resources. So we're about to drop onto our blog a fantastic video course produced by Steve McGarry. Steve sold his business to Max Levchin, who's the founder of PayPal, and he's produced a 7-module course for Flippa. So we're about to make that available on the Flippa blog. That will be up probably within about 48 hours, so check that out. And that's a really good resource. They're probably the 2 things I would recommend.
Perfect. Running up on time, I think we have time for 1 or 2 more. This is from Julia Simon. Blake, what are your thoughts on negotiating a lower price via the app or via Flippa? It's funny, we actually didn't talk a whole lot about negotiation in this webinar, but this is a great time to talk about it. I'll start by saying that everything's open to negotiation. Every asset on Flippa, if you can negotiate a lower price, you have every right to do that, and the seller has every right to sell you at any price. I will say though, you're going to want reasons to negotiate. You're going to want leverage points to negotiate. And the way to do that is to do your due diligence, comb through the financials and the traffic, so that you can approach the seller and say, I really like your site, but I've looked at the numbers and I think there's a problem here, or maybe I can improve this. Either way, can you discount because of X, Y, Z?
Yep.
That's going to get you a lot further in negotiations with the seller.
Yeah, I think that one of the good things to do is to look at other flipper listings and then use that as leverage. So you can look at how other assets are being priced or how other assets are being sold on the platform, and you can provide those as examples to the seller. Yeah. Because sellers often will overvalue their assets. Now, of course, Flipper has a valuation calculator that a lot of people use. And the other thing that we do is through the onboarding experience itself, we provide price guidance. And so there are certain hurdles which our sellers need to go through. And of course, we have absolute max price points that people can price their listings at. But you do have leverage. Build some rapport, look at some historical data, and then build it on more established net profit multiple expectations that you know about from the Flipper marketplace or the broader macro environment. And so, as we said, there's content was operating at what was it, 1.85 times, and that's for a fully optimized, well-optimized site. Of course, that's the average. It doesn't mean that you can't get something for less expensive, and it also doesn't mean that you might not have to pay overs.
Excellent. I think the last question is from Jason. He says, great webinar, guys. I had to bounce back and forth with kid responsibilities. You know what that's like?
Well done, Jason.
Will there be a replay available after the webinar? So,
yeah, it's the simplest question I've had all day.
There you go.
I like it.
And on an easy note.
Yes, so we will send this around to everyone. It is being recorded. We will send this around. We will make it available with the transcript on the Flipper blog. And of course, the deck, the slideshow that we've gone through today will also be available.
Excellent.
Alrighty, so let's wrap it up there. I think there's a couple of key points. One, this is a burgeoning asset class. Competition will increase among buyers. And of course, sellers are becoming more sophisticated and prices for assets are creeping up ever so slightly. The other thing is that you should always think about this from a perspective of a safe bet. Buy something where you can add subject matter expertise and buy something that you're actually interested in. The range of assets available is changing every day. So obviously we've got content, e-commerce and SaaS, but we've also got marketplace businesses. We've got apps, we've got domains. We've also got YouTube accounts. We've got Instagram feeds. We've got any number of digital assets which are being made available on the Flipper platform. So browse, become familiar and start to look at the type of asset that you think would best suit you. And then finally, Stefan, I think you did an amazing job. So you guys are working on search. Start by setting up your preferences. Update those preferences at any time. Let us send you our safe search email so you can click straight through to a listing which matches up. And then use Flipper end-to-end. It's a free service for buyers. Come out the other side, have a fantastic experience, get into the digital asset space. Of course, jump onto our blog, check out the many resources there. We'll make this recording available. And thank you all very much for joining us today. And thank you, Stefan.
Thank you.
See you soon.